now we're gonna study PHP. Study with me.
To insert data from your website. So what essentially they'll do is inside our browser here, they'll actually go into your form, start writing information, but in one of these inputs they'll start writing code, which then gets sent to your database and seen as code. And we don't want people to be able to do this inside our website, because they could essentially say that they want to create something or destroy something inside our database directly from our website. So we need to make sure we don't allow people to do this directly inside the website. So like I said, when it comes to procedural programming, there's two methods we can use inside PHP. Now the first one here I'm going to show you guys, which we're just going to focus on in this episode, is a method where we go in and get the data that the user typed in inside the form, and then escape the characters to make sure that the database only sees the text as text and not as actual code. So when we do actually have the form inside our index file, which we created in the previous episode, and send the data to our standard.inc.php file, then we want to do something in between here, which escapes the text that the user typed in and then makes it into characters. Okay, so inside our signup.inc.php file, we did actually get all the data from the previous form inside the index page by creating variables and set them equal to the actual data. So what we're going to go and do is, after the first variable, which is called first, after the equal sign, we're going to say we have a PHP function called my sqli underscore real underscore escape underscore string parentheses. Now inside the parentheses we need to have two different parameters. The first one is going to be the database connection to our database, and the second parameter is going to be the actual data that the user passed on from the form. So inside the parentheses we're going to go ahead and say we have a variable called variable con, which is the connection we have inside our database connection over here. So our actual database connection line, a connection we have inside our database connection over here. So our actual database connection line is equal to variable con. So just simply include that inside as parameter 1. Then we're going to say comma, space, and then we're just going to go ahead and take the data from the previous form and just paste it inside the second parameter. I'm going to go ahead and save this one, and now what we basically just need to do is copy paste this inside the rest of the variables underneath here. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy, paste, 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 and paste, as well as getting the last part of the actual function and pasting them as well. So right now we just escaped all the different characters we have inside the code that the user passed on from the previous form to make sure the database doesn't see this as code. And just to point out what I mean when I say that the database is going to see this as code if we don't do this, if I were to type some kind of SQL code inside my website here, and then it gets passed on to our code and insert inside the SQL statement we have down here. If I were to go inside one of the values here where we have variable first would actually get replaced by whatever we have inside variable first up here, which means that whatever it's equal to. And if I were to write code, it means that the variable first is equal to some kind of SQL code. So basically what just happens inside the SQL statement is that it replaces variable first with actual SQL code, where we can actually go ahead and close off this statement and write a new statement if we want to, and say it has to maybe destroy a table called users if we want to do that, and then all the users inside your database will be deleted, and we don't want to do that. So to make sure that doesn't happen, we need to make sure we escape the characters inside our code.
Port ka block just page. Mr. Admin. Mr. Admin. Will be blocking his port. Stupid.
Hello everyone, in this video I will show you how to fix this error, MySQL shut down unexpectedly. So in a previous video that you can find in the description, I explained how to fix this error when the POR number is used by another application. And in this video, I will show you how to fix this error when the MySQL database is corrupted. So let's click on the Start button of the MySQL service. So we can see that the POR number appears, then disappears, and then we have this error. This means that we need to repair the MySQL database. So let's go to the folder of example. Then let's open the MySQL folder. So here,
example. MySQL. There we go again.
here we have the data folder, which contains the data of our database. So let's make a copy of this folder. Then I will rename this folder and I will call it data old. Now let's repair this folder. So here we can see. Now let's repair this folder. So here we can see that we have different folders. Each folder corresponds to a database. So here we have to keep our databases and we need to delete the MySQL databases. So the first MySQL database is this folder. So let's select it. Also we need to select this folder called Performance Schema. So we have to click on the Control button of the keyboard and then we have to click on this folder. Then we have to delete this folder called PHP MyAdmin. And finally we have to delete this folder. So let's delete all of these folders. Then we need to select all the files. But we should not delete this file. It is called ibdata1. So let's unselect it. Now let's delete all the files. And then let's go to the backup folder to repair our data. So this is the backup folder. So let's copy everything inside this folder, but we should not copy this file. It is called ibdata1. So let's unselect it. Then let's copy everything. Then let's go back to our data folder and let's paste what we have. This.
Let's try this. Yes, it's running. It's happy, very old. Let's try if it works. If it doesn't, we're dead. We're done. Oh yes. Oh. Let's proceed to our learning what will escape string actually does. How many puppets shows. It still gives out the actual string. اسهل Windows. Let's see.
okay? You should never take the post statement directly and insert it inside your values down here, okay? Because if we do that, we don't get a chance to escape the characters. So we just talked about how to escape characters using MySQLi, but when it comes to procedural PHP coding, there's actually another way, which is called prepared statements, which is actually much safer to use, and depending on what you need to do with the database, it can also be much faster to actually do than using MySQLi. Now in the next episode, I'm going to show you guys how to actually do prepared statements using PHP programming when it comes to procedural programming. And then in a later episode, it's my plan to create a login system with you guys who can actually start using the stuff we learned inside these lessons here to actually build something you can use inside a website. Now, when we build this login system, it's not going to be built using prepared statements in the first episode, because prepared statements can, for newer people, be a bit tough to understand. So when we do actually get to login system tutorial, I will be showing you guys how to do it using MySQLi to begin with, and then in the episode afterwards, I'm going to show you guys how to replace it with prepared statements, okay? I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.
If you want to learn Python for a career in data science, IT, or engineering, then you need the complete Python Bootcamp course on Udemy. These videos and practice exercises help you learn the fundamentals and so much more. You can create a career-ready...
In the last episode, we learned how to protect our database when a user goes to your website and insert data directly from your website into the database. And the reason we need to do this is because it's actually possible for people to go to your website, and when you allow for them to actually write something themselves that then gets sent to the database, is that we allow for people to actually write code which will then get read by the database, and we actually allow for people to mess up the database. So the user could potentially go into a database and delete or change or see things that they shouldn't see inside the database. So we need to make sure we protect the database inside our website from what's called SQL injection, which is when people do actually go into a website and write something inside an input, like inside a form, and sends code inside your database. Now in the previous episode, we talked about how to protect the database by using MySQLi, which is what we did right here by using the MySQLi function inside PHP. Now there's a much better way we can do this, which is not using MySQLi, by using something called prepared statements. Now the idea behind prepared statements is that when we have some kind of SQL statement like the one we have down here, we can actually go in and say, well, we don't know what the data is actually going to be yet, which means we're going to go ahead and add placeholders instead of the actual variables down here. We then send the SQL code to the database to actually parse it, which means we're actually going to run the code inside the database, and then afterwards, later on, we send the actual data to the database and replace the placeholders inside our SQL statements. And because when we do actually send the data later on, we use a different protocol inside the database won't actually read the placeholders as code inside the database, it's just going to see it as characters. Now today, prepared statements is actually seen as the preferred method when you do actually connect to a database and either need to see stuff or insert stuff into the database. So once you do actually start making websites that need to actually be uploaded online, then it's recommended that you do actually use prepared statements, okay? Now what we're going to go ahead and do in this episode is, first of all, I'm going to go and show you guys how to use prepared statements when it comes to selecting data inside the database. And then afterwards, I'm going to show you guys how to do it when we want to insert data inside the database. So a couple of episodes ago, we talked about how to select data directly from the website, which I believe was the first episode where we did actually do anything inside the actual website that had anything to do with the database. So if you guys want the lesson files from that previous episode, I recommend you guys go back a couple episodes to where we do actually learn how to select data directly from the website, and download the lesson file so you guys can actually follow this lesson here if you guys want to. So this is the file that we had a couple of episodes ago, where we just simply inside the index file went in, selected data, and spit it out inside the website. And what we did here is we just selected everything from inside the users table and spit out the username of every single user. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and say we want to select a specific user inside the database. What we're going to do first here is we're going to go ahead and say we have a select statement that selects everything from users, where user underscore UID is equal to a specific name. So right now inside my database, if we were to take a look at it, you guys can see that right now I have just one user inside the database called admin. Now I want to select admin inside my website. So what we could do here is inside the select statement, say we want to select a user ID called single quotes admin. So if we were to save this and then refresh the browser, you guys should see that we get admin. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to say that, well, we want to include a placeholder instead of the actual name of the user we want to select from the database. So I'm going to go ahead and say question mark. And then afterwards, I'm just going to go ahead and delete everything we have in here except for the while loop down inside our check down here. So I'm just going to delete everything except for the while loop. And then we're going to go ahead and replace all this code with prepared statements instead of using MySQLi, which is what we used before. Okay, so underneath the SQL statement, and we can actually go ahead and write a comment here just so we know exactly what's going on. I'm going to go ahead and say that we just created a template, which we'll then use later on when we do actually have the actual data that it needs to insert instead of the placeholder. So we're going to say we just created a template. And then after we create the template, we need to actually create the prepared statement. So what we're going to do is we're going to say we have a comment that says create a prepared statement, which I'm going to go ahead and say is a variable called stmt, which stands for statements. I'm going to set it equal to a PHP function called mysqli underscore stmt underscore init, which stands for initialize. So basically what we're starting up here is a prepared statement. Now, right now inside this prepared statement here, we need to tell it which connection we want to use to actually do this inside the database. So what we do actually have is inside our DBH file, we have a connection to the database called variable con. So I'm going to go ahead and say we want to use this connection inside our statement down here. So I'm going to go ahead and paste it inside as a parameter inside the function. So after creating the prepared statement, I'm going to go underneath here. And now we need to actually prepare the prepared statement using the SQL statement we have up here, the template. So I'm going to go ahead and say we want to prepare the prepared statements. And we do that using another PHP function called mysqli underscore stmt underscore prepare. Now, before we actually continue, we can actually go ahead and create a check here that checks if this prepared statement can actually work using the SQL statement we have up here, using the template that we created beforehand. So what I can do here is I can actually go ahead and say we have an if statement. And inside the condition of the if statement, I'm going to insert my function down here called mysqli underscore statement underscore prepare, insert it inside of here. And then inside the parameters of this function, I can actually go ahead and insert the statement that we created previously. So I'm going to insert it as the first parameter. And then the second parameter is going to be the actual SQL template that we created up here. So I'm going to paste it in as parameter number 2. So now what we just did here is we went ahead and said, okay, if this function here does actually succeed, it should go ahead and run the code inside the if statement. Now, when it comes to PHP code, we want to always check for failure before we check for success. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and insert a exclamation mark right before the function, which now means that instead of checking if it succeeds, we now check if it failed. So if this does actually fail, we should write some kind of message inside the if statement. So we could actually echo some kind of string that says SQL statement failed, just so we know what actually happened if we were to actually fail using this SQL statement. Okay, so afterwards we want to say, well, we have an if statement, then else. If this actually succeeded, then we want to run the code inside the else statement. So now what we did so far is we did actually create the template, we did actually create a prepared statement using the connection to the database, and then afterward we prepared the prepared statement using the template. So what we want to do now is we want to actually bind the parameters we want to replace with the placeholders inside the template. And we do that by going inside the else statement. We create a comment called bind parameters to the placeholders, or holders, since we only have one in here. And underneath here, we're going to go ahead and create a PHP function called my sqli underscore stmt underscore bind underscore param, which stands for parameters, parentheses, semicolon. And inside the parentheses, we need to have a couple of different parameters. Now, the first one is going to be the actual statement that we prepared up here called stmt. So we're going to go ahead and say we have variable stmt, comma, space. Then the second parameter is going to be an indicator for the placeholder we insert inside the template up here. So right now we have a question mark instead of the actual data. So what I'm going to do is inside as the second parameter, I'm going to say double quotes, and then I'm going to go ahead and write s, which means that right now we only have one placeholder inside the statement. If I were to have a second placeholder, such as if I were to also check if user underscore first, which is the first name, was equal to question mark, and again we would also add something like and in between here. Then right now we would actually first which is the first name, was equal to question mark, and again we would also add something like and in between here. Then right now we would actually check for two different factors inside our database. We would check for the username and the first name. So right now we do actually have two different placeholders. In that case, we would actually add a second s inside the double quotes. Now in this episode, we're not going to go ahead and do that, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete what I just wrote here, but just to show you the double quotes. Now in this episode, we're not going to go ahead and do that, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete what I just wrote here, but just to show you guys who would actually do that. Now the third parameter inside this function here is going to be the actual data that we want to insert instead of the placeholder up here. Now we haven't actually created that data yet, because in some cases, like inside a typical website, we could actually allow for people to write something and then search for it inside the database. But because right now we just want to select some kind of user using some kind of name, I'm going to create a variable at the very top here, which I'm going to call data, just to give it some kind of name. I'm going to set it equal to double quotes, which is a string called admin. So right now data is equal to admin, which is the name we want to search for inside the database, or the username that we want to search for. So I'm going to set this s down here, which right now represents the placeholder inside the SQL statement. I'm going to say we want to replace it with this variable data we created up here by saying that the third parameter is going to be variable data. Now if we were to have two different placeholders and we did actually have the second s, the way we would do this is we would actually create a fourth parameter, which would then be equal to whatever variable we created for the second parameter or the second placeholder inside the statement here, okay? But right now, because we just have one, I'm just going to include one inside the parameters down here. So now that we did this, we can actually execute the actual statement inside our database. So essentially what we're actually doing here is we're saying that we have this SQL statement, we then run it inside the database, and after it's been passed inside the database, we then include the actual data that needs to be used instead of the placeholders. So underneath here, what we're going to go ahead and say is that we want to actually run this SQL statement, but using the parameters we gave it down here. And the way we're going to do that is, first of all, let's actually go ahead and create a comment that says run parameters inside database. Then we're going to go ahead and say we have a PHP function called mysqli underscore stmt underscore execute parentheses. And then inside the parentheses, we just need to include the statement that we just prepared, like so, which means that right now we actually ran this line of code, which had all the data inside we need to replace inside the placeholders inside the database. Now, after doing this, we still need to get the actual data. So underneath here, what we're going to go ahead and say is we want to take the results from the executed statement and insert them inside a variable. So right now we want to say we have a variable called result, which is equal to a PHP function called mysqli underscore stmt underscore get underscore result parentheses semicolon. Then inside the parentheses, we need to actually get the data from inside the statement we just prepared. And then after we do this, we can actually take the while loop that we had down here and just simply put it inside our else statement, like so. So right now we just did the exact same thing as we did in the previous episode. We just went in and selected data, but instead we did it using prepared statements, which is much safer to use inside a website. So just to go ahead and check what we did in here, if I were to refresh the browser, you guys can see we still get admin inside our browser. Now we were to actually go back inside the code and say we want to search for not admin, but John, because we don't have that inside the database. You guys will notice that we don't get any kind of results. So what we want to do now is, now that we learned how to actually select data from inside the database, now we want to actually insert data inside the database. So in order to do this, I'm going to go and use the lesson material from the previous episode where we learned how to insert data inside the database, which is right after the episode where we learned how to select data. So if you guys are interested, you can just go ahead and go back to that episode and download the lesson files if you want to follow this lesson here. Now, when it comes to inserting data inside a database, you want to follow this lesson.
To write this mistake. Stand please outside.
Lesson here. It's very much the same as we did. So down inside our insert statement, down here inside the SQL variable, I'm going to go ahead and go inside my values and replace the first, last, email, UID, and password. And I'm going to replace these with a question mark, which means the right.
Question mark. What?
SQL variable, I'm going to go ahead and go inside my values and replace the first, last, email, UID, and password. And I'm going to replace these with a question mark, which means that right now we actually created placeholders, which we're then going to give the SQL statement later on when we do actually create a prepared statement. So I'm going to go ahead and delete my MySQLi query down here because we don't actually need it. And then instead, I'm going to go ahead and create a prepared statement just like we did previously. So I'm going to say we have a variable stmt, which is equal to MySQLi underscore stmt underscore init parentheses. And I'm going to do this using the connection to the database, which again is variable con, which I created inside a separate document. I'm going to insert it inside my parameter. And then underneath here, I'm going to go ahead and prepare this prepared statement using this SQL code up here. So we're going to go ahead and do a check, just like we did previously, where we check for failure first. So we're going to say exclamation mark, and then we're going to use a function called MySQLi underscore stmt underscore prepare
underscore
parentheses, and inside the parentheses, we need to actually write that correctly, like so. Then inside the parentheses, we need to include first of all the statement up here, and then the second parameter is going to be the SQL statement.
Right.
Now, if we do actually get an error message because it can't actually run this SQL statement inside the database, then it's going to go ahead and run a piece of code that says echo a string called SQL error or something. You can just go ahead and write whatever you want in here. It's just for us to know if there was some kind of error. So after the if statement, I'm going to say we have an else statement. And inside the else statement, we want to actually bind the parameters to the placeholders inside the insert statement, just like we did in the previous part. So what we need to do here is we need to create the function called MySQLi underscore stmt underscore bind underscore parent, because we need to bind the parameters to the actual statements. So inside the function parameters, we're going to say we want to use the statement that we created up here. And then the second parameter is going to be the indicator of how many parameters we want to bind to the template we created up here, which in this case is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because we have 5 different placeholders inside the SQL statement. So I'm going to say SSSSS, which is 5 S's. Then afterwards, we're going to say comma, space. And then we need to insert the actual variables that we want to replace with the placeholders inside the SQL statement. So the first one is going to be variable first. So I'm going to say variable first, comma, then variable last, comma, and then we just paste in the rest of them, which is email, comma, UID, comma, and the password, like so. So now that we told the statement what the parameters should be inside the placeholders, let's actually go ahead and run the code inside the database. So we can actually use the function called MySQLi underscore stmt underscore execute parentheses.
Wait. 5 parameters, 5 letters. Letter S means string. What? UID, PWT, then we execute. Time statement here. Then result. Wait, not yet.
Colon, and then inside the parentheses we're going to say we have variable statements. We're going to save it and then try to run it inside our browser. So I'm going to go and refresh and type in something inside the inputs. I'm going to say John Doe. Email is going to be john@gmail.com. Then I'm going to go and give him a username called John23. And his password is going to be test123. I'm going to say sign up, and then I'm going to go inside my database, refresh it, and now you guys can see we get John Doe inside the database. So this is how we can actually use prepared statements inside our website, inside the database. Start my database, refresh it, and now you guys can see we get John Doe inside the database. So this is how we can actually use prepared statements inside our website when we want to either select or insert data inside a database. And it's the exact same method if you were to, instead of inserting data, if you want to change data or use any of the other SQL email password is database, refresh it, and now you guys can see we get John.
Let's try this one. We don't need to see the results. We're only inserting file. Let's say Moses. C splitter. Splitter gmail.com. Motion. Moses. Sign up. Oh my god. Oh God's unit is happening. I named it query. Why did I put SQL? Sign up. Oh shit. 1 2 3 4 5. 1 2 3. It's named PWD. Null and stock trace. Line 19. First name, last name. That's password. It's not supposed. My bad. I was following the tutorial. Then. Oh yeah, so I haven't actually inserted it. Amazing. That's all. But that's all. Thank you for watching. Hopefully you can code them yourself too next time. Goodbye.